From someplace over the Pacific Northwest, this is the Space Dog Radio Show. I'm the Space Dog. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being part of the program. Space Dog Radio available to you 24/7 from SpaceDogRadio.com. You can also find us on Twitter at SpaceDogRadio. Today, a special guest, Mark Taylor-Canfield, again joins us on Space Dog Radio. He's a fiercely independent journalist who has contributed to the Huffington Post, the Daily Cause, reports for Free Speech Radio. He's worked with Truth Out, been on the Jeff Santos Show, the Mike Malloy Show, the Tom Hartman Show, the Norman Goldman Show, and more, including recently participating in the first ever International Livestream Congress. There's just too many to mention, but needless to say, we appreciate having him as a regular contributor on Space Dog Radio. Mark, thanks for joining us again. What do you have as far as news that's under the radar?
People don't know this because it's not getting any media coverage at all, is that all over the country there are groups who are affiliated with the Occupy movement who have been doing all sorts of very direct community service. One great example of that, of course, is Occupy Sandy, which helps folks recover from the hurricane in New Jersey and New York. And then there's also an Occupy tornado relief project that took place in Oklahoma after those recent tornadoes. There's also Occupy Medical in Eugene, Oregon, which has a bunch of volunteer medical practitioners and a mobile unit that can go around to different neighborhoods and give health screenings. They actually were getting referrals from the Veterans Administration Hospital and the local county health department. So those are an example of things that have been happening this year around the country in neighborhoods all over the United States, Canada, and other countries. It's just that it's not getting any corporate news coverage at all, and there haven't been as many arrests or mass demonstrations. Although there are a lot of events going on, of course, today. They've been happening in New York City since the 15th, 2 days ago, and they have continued until today, including some ballet at the Wall Street Bull statue, which, if people are familiar with that, it's become an iconic image of the Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street movement, the ballerina on top of the bull. And there's also a puppet brigade that's going to do a bunch of street theater, and there are all sorts of discussions going on online and in public places today about the effects of the Occupy Wall Street movement, how it's changed the social and political dialogue, and what's happening today in terms of how has anything changed in terms of the bailouts on Wall Street, the fraud and abuse happening on Wall Street, and that kind of thing. Which the general consensus seems to be that nothing much has changed. We're just still in stage 2 or 3, I guess, of the bailouts at this point.
Right.
Which is what sparked the Occupy Wall Street movement to begin with, as well as the Tea Party movement.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting looking back, and people shouldn't be frustrated, though, because I think the Occupy movement has brought a lot to light, and there is a lot more activism that's available to people than was available to them before the Occupy movement. Yeah, I mean, everywhere from Occupy Florida all the way up here to the Pacific Northwest, over to Toronto, Vancouver, BC, over in the UK, throughout Europe, and even Japan. The Occupy movement is not dead. It's still alive and kicking.
As I always say, to paraphrase Mark Twain, my namesake, actually, the rumors of the demise of the Occupy movement have been greatly exaggerated, and that's been the theme of my journalism for the last 2 years, because it's not going to get corporate media coverage if there isn't a lot of police activity and arrests and major demonstrations. But what's happening locally around the country in communities, like you said, in every state, are small community projects that are actually making a difference every day in people's lives. So I was saying in my Truth Out article that that's the difference between the Occupy movement today and where it was 2 years ago. Now, instead of marching in the street and demanding accountability and healthcare, transportation, education from our political leaders and the corporate representatives, people are trying to offer free universities, free education, free healthcare, food, whatever needs to be supplied during this time of austerity when government programs and corporations aren't really, taking responsibility for what's happening on the street. So one of the major lessons is that each part of the country, and each state, and each community has its own social issues and environmental issues that need to be addressed, and they're not necessarily all the same, although there are definitely some common interests. But in Washington State, it's the coal trains. In Canada, it's the Alberta tar sands project. In New York, it's fracking. So wherever you go in the country, there may be different issues that these folks are working on, but they all were born of the Occupy Wall Street movement, which happened 2 years ago today in New York City, September 17th, S17. And if folks want to find out more information about what's happening about the anniversary event, you can go to a website which has been really useful for folks over the last year. It's called interoccupy.net. And that is actually the website that organizes a weekly national press briefing that I are usually involved with, where alternative media journalists and activists from all over the country get together once a week to talk about their particular issues and what's happening around the country. So it's a great conversation to get involved with, and people can register for that actually by clicking on the calendar tab at interoccupy.net and register for that conference call if you're interested in participating. So
Great.
That's a call out to folks, who want to hear what's happening and what's going on around the country, things you will not hear in the corporate media, and also for reporters and journalists and webcasters and netizens of all types. But that, that is something coming up in the Northwest that we might want to talk about, the coal train hearing. So you might want to, can you give Phil a little idea of what's happening with that?
Sure. There's a hearing coming up in Longview about the Longview item going on, and I guess the bottom line is, occupy Wall Street, occupy Florida, occupy your neighborhood. It doesn't matter. Occupy is no longer just, like you say, a bunch of parades and camping out in parks. It is a huge, full-on movement. But back to the coal train issue. There's going to be a hearing about the potential terminal being built in Longview, Washington. And recently, just something came up that was revealed from a reporter from EarthFix. Ashley Ahern from EarthFix obtained documents through the Freedom of Information Act from the Army Corps of Engineers, and basically it just surmise that coal trains are bad for wetlands. The conclusion was drawn after review of a 2007 environmental impact study to allow two 8,500 feet by 40-foot wide railroad tracks for coal rail cars to park to alleviate rail traffic congestion. But the permit request was withdrawn when it was determined that the, quote, the project would destroy nearly 3 acres of wetlands outright and potentially contaminate more wetlands with coal pollution along 4 miles of a rail line that services the plant. End of quote. Some of what the Corps said about the coal train pollution in this permit, quote, the demonstration of biological uptake of coal-derived contaminants in a small number of studies suggests that precipitation could wash potentially toxic amounts of potential chemical contaminants from loaded and unloaded coal cars, end of quote. So we're talking about expanding more coal with over 100 million tons of coal. This new study that was just revealed just through the journalism of Ashley Ahern of EarthFix is very telling, because those coal trains are going to be traveling across 15,000 acres of wetlands. And in Longview alone, you're talking about 44 million tons of coal being shipped out to Asia. So it's a very dynamic situation. I'll put a link on SpaceDogRadio SpaceDogRadio.com about more Coltrane issues. But yeah, that's another factor that's going into the politics here in the Pacific Northwest. Mark, you know we've got Initiative 522 about GMOs here in the Pacific Northwest coming up on the ballot. You just had an interesting discussion with a very phenomenal speaker on the subject.
Yes, I was through the auspices of Yes Magazine and Free Speech Radio News. I was able to buy Dr. Vandana Shiva for Free Speech Radio News, which is on the Pacifica Network. So if it hasn't been broadcast by now, it probably will be by the time people get this podcast. But it's you can go to FSRN for freespeechradionews.org for that report. But it was an interview that I did with her, and she was in Seattle at Town Hall giving a presentation that was a part of about 24 different local organic farming and food groups who got together to discuss Initiative 522, sponsored by Yes Magazine, which is also a local, it's an international magazine, but it's based here in the Northwest near Seattle, actually out on one of the islands. But it was a great event, and she had a lot to say about Initiative 522 during our interview and during her speech at Town Hall. And what she told me in the interview was that basically she thought that a yes vote on Initiative 522 is important not just to people in the Northwest, but to people all over the world, and that the future of the planet depends on these kinds of initiatives. So she put a very serious light on it and kind of opened my eyes to, what folks like her think about these kinds of initiatives. What it is it's a statewide initiative which is calling for the labeling of GMOs, which is something that most folks in the United States don't have the right to, which is to know which food at their supermarket or convenience store or whatever is genetically modified. So it's calling for that. It's a labeling measure. And a similar thing actually happened back under the Clinton administration when they pushed the labeling of the nutritional content in food, because up until that point, folks weren't even allowed to know whether there were any vitamins or nutrients in their food. So the corporations like Monsanto and DuPont are pumping millions and millions of dollars into the state right now to fight this campaign. So it's become a major issue and will probably become, if it hasn't already, international news. But it's another example from the point of view of a journalist where the Northwest, and Seattle especially, seems to be a innovative sort of risk and lead taker on a lot of these issues. So it does lend itself to a lot of news coverage for folks like me who are interested in these kind of issues, because we also were able to legalize the recreational use of marijuana and same-sex marriage over the last year, which, by the way, are probably two issues that the Occupy Wall Street movement supports, but it was done through citizen initiatives and a ballot measure, which is something that some states have, initiative and referendum measures, where they can actually collect signatures, qualify something for the ballot, and then get a statewide vote. So that's how those changes have happened in the Northwest. But before we run out of time, I really did want to talk about what happened in Toronto and what's happening actually still in Toronto as we speak. There's the first international Livestream Congress taking place, which is in itself a very innovative sort of idea where folks from all over the world are gathering both in person and online to do very lengthy and detailed webinars about live streaming. And I was asked by the organizers to do a presentation about the new journalism and freedom of speech in the United States, which is an issue that we talked about before, but that once again is sort of under the radar in terms of the rest of the media in the United States. The corporate media really doesn't want to report on the fact that the United States is listed 32nd on the Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index. So there's a problem, in every country around the world when it comes to freedom of speech in terms of, keeping that right and allowing people to have a free press and free access to information. But live streaming has become one of those avenues to do that, where citizen journalists and what Reporters Without Borders calls netizens, which are folks who don't necessarily consider themselves professional journalists, but who often provide a lot of information through their podcasts, live streams, blogs, etc., So it was a very interesting experience to interact with people both online, because it allowed people from all over the world to participate who couldn't get to Toronto. But it's pretty much spearheaded by some groups that Occupy Toronto. Speaking of the anniversary of the Occupy Wall Street movement, Occupy Toronto has had an ongoing live stream for at least a year now that I know of, and they helped organize some of these live streamers to get together and talk about what's happening with the movement. But it's very, very innovative. Live streaming is definitely on the cutting edge of all media right now. Radio stations that used to, like Norman Goldman's show and Tom Hartman and folks like that, so all of those programs are live streaming now. It's become sort of the way to broadcast yourself without a huge multi-million-dollar television studio. So, and a lot of people are doing it. I'm finally starting to do it after sort of being dragged into it. But I'm really appreciative of people who organized the first annual, hopefully the first annual International Live Streaming Congress in Toronto, because it's allowed a lot of folks to get involved in live streaming who have never tried it before.
Appreciate all that insight. Anything coming up this week that we should be looking for about news under the radar?
Well, it's obvious there's just some really big stories that I'm actually on a timeline to cover for Free Speech Radio News, including today's Occupy Wall Street events, and then the Initiative 522 story, and probably several other headline news stories that I've forgotten at the moment because I get so overwhelmed by the work. But I would say, the thing to keep an eye on here is Initiative 522 in terms of a major story, because it could set a precedent for the rest of the country. And so I'm going to be definitely keeping my eye out for news stories about that and how the major corporations are trying to counter the initiative movement to stop it in its tracks.
Okay.
But it's a major story that, people should keep their eye on. I guess that would be my suggestion at this point.
Yep. Okay, well, appreciate all the insights. That's awesome. Congratulations on the first ever International Livestream Congress. That's awesome. We're going to put a link on SpaceDogRadio.com. Mark Taylor-Canfield on Facebook. You can also find him on Twitter. Mark, thanks again for all your input, and hopefully we'll be talking to you again real soon.
Hey, thanks for keeping up on these news stories. It's good to have that information out there for people to get. And shout out to Leica. We love the Space Dog. So see you soon.
All right. Thank you. From someplace over the Pacific Northwest, this has been the Space Dog Radio Show. I am the Space Dog along with Mark Taylor-Canfield. Thank you for listening. Be safe, be happy, and we'll catch you next orbit.